Okay, so let's talk low code, no code. We throw this term around to describe building block development platforms like Microsoft Power Platform. But what is it really? And do CIOs see it as an enabler or a destabler? My name is Mike Gersten from RockHop, and today we're hosting a panel discussion on these topics with three really exceptional IT executives. You're going to want to buckle up for this one. It's sure to be a lively and insightful discussion. We have a great group of experts and a provocative topic. First, I would like to introduce you to Phil Topness. Phil's going to moderate today's discussion. Phil is the principal program manager on Microsoft's Power Cat team. And if you don't already know this team, their mission is to help Microsoft's most complex customers succeed with Power Platform. In fact, any customer that you've seen standing next to Microsoft's CEO on stage talking about Power Apps, they've worked with Phil's team. So we're really excited to have Phil moderating today's discussion. And thank you for hosting today, Phil. We appreciate it. I'm also excited to introduce you to our three panelists. First up, we have Yvonne Scott. Yvonne is the CEO of CIO Concierge. CIO Concierge is known for helping organizations simplify and accelerate the impact of technology on business results. And prior to that, Yvonne spent almost 30 years serving as the CIO for Crow, and before that, GATX. Welcome, Yvonne. Next on the panel, we have David Johnson. David is the Chief Technology Officer at Hilco Global. Hilco Global is the world's premier authority on asset valuation and advisory solutions in the financial services industry. Before that, David served as the global CIO for JLL for nearly 20 years. And before and after that, he worked as a consultant both independently and at Pricewaterhouse. Nice to see you again, David. And then finally, we have Greg Adams joining us today. Greg serves as the Vice President of Information Technology for Dries Homes. Dries is one of the U.S.'s premier home builders. And prior to Dries, Greg served as Enterprise Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at JLL for over 20 years. Welcome, Greg. With that, I think I will just turn it directly over to you, Phil, and we can begin today's discussion. So, Phil?
Thanks, Mike, for that. And I am so happy to be here with this group of CIOs and expertise to talk about low code. So we've got decades of experience here on this panel. So let's first ask, if you could go back 10 years ago, what problems would low code have addressed that you wish you would have had it for then?
The number one thing would have been time to view. So, 10 years ago, we were doing waterfall projects that would take weeks to get to anything that was visible. And with low or no code, it's sometimes hours before you see things that are visible or maybe a day or two. So my experience has been that people react better to what they see and the product ends up better as soon as they can see it and can start to steer against requirements and can steer visually what they would like to see on the screen. So for me, that time to show, reducing that makes for a better long-term project and makes for a shorter time to delivery as well.
I was just going to say, you've got your three pillars of scope, schedule, budget. I think it addresses all three. I think you affect your cost because you don't have near as much scrap, because you've involved the business throughout the process. You've involved your teams with tools throughout the process that are a little easier and quicker to manipulate. So I think you hit that cost bucket. Hopefully you hit the schedule, and hopefully you can increase scope so you can do more for less in a quicker amount of time.
You saw a lot of bloating of portfolios when you were trying to do portfolio management for things that were valuable, but in relative value to a business that's trying to allocate, millions upon millions of dollars in development, they tend to fall to the bottom. And so the business didn't necessarily advance in some of the areas, particularly around reporting and gaining insights from data as quickly as I think they could have, because the developers were overqualified, frankly, to do some of that work. And it wasn't necessarily the best return on the dollar. So I think having had that in place sooner I think we would have seen a better evolution of data insights than what we saw.
So you've all mentioned better use of data and addressing that long tail of apps that often don't get addressed, and time to value and being able to build more. So as a CIO, part of your job is to manage your application portfolio. How does low code affect that? Like, is low code shadow IT?
I think it depends on what it's being used for and in what context. So if there's not a good partnership between IT and the business units that are employing the low code, and they don't rely on IT for certain guardrails and I would say digital foundations like common data repositories where the data is actually vetted and well defined, then you have a greater risk of this shadow IT that actually has a boomerang effect on the technology department.
I think if low code is used as sort of a requirements builder, it's really valuable and can bring a lot of efficiency to the process between you and your business. Still, since low code development doesn't require extensive coding, anyone in the organization can build web and mobile applications. Now, here comes the kicker: provided they have the time, the interest, and at least some technical aptitude. So the technical aptitude to me is really important because you have to have a little bit of programmer in you, even with low or no code, to think logically about how you solve your problem and get that to the screen.
Yeah, and I think you have to separate shadow IT into good and bad. So to me, the bad shadow IT is when the right people and the right teams aren't involved at all, and a group's just kind of gone off on their own because maybe they don't trust you, maybe you're not a partner with the business, or maybe they just want to go on their merry way. To me, that's the bad shadow IT. The good shadow IT is use it as an incubator. Folks are out trying new ideas. Innovation's probably the overused word, but that's how you get innovation from kind of the grassroots level, allowing people to try things, quickly fail, and try something different.
To me, the real evil shadow IT is not the business doing it, not IT and the business working together, but it's when third parties come in and sell on top of the IT group and sell directly to the business and then perform the shadow IT and convince the business that it is production quality IT. And they do that without any knowledge of what's inside IT and the control structure necessary and cybersecurity necessary, and that's where it gets rogue. As long as you have a good relationship with your business, hopefully that doesn't happen. But we've all been there. We've all had people sell over top of us. And with low to no code, it gets easier for lots of different people who don't have a lot of skills to sell over top of you.
Is it possible for the business to build automation that isn't shadow IT?
I think there is. I think if you've created a platform and a governance structure that allows it to happen, and we, Yvonne talked about the guardrails.
We need to get away from the term shadow IT for those things that are really should be woven into the fabric of how we do business. I mean, the reality is that as we have generational change, you're going to have people coming into the workforce already do that are much better prepared, have more technical skill, and are wanting to self-serve. And to the extent that they can self-serve in those spaces where you've agreed it makes sense for them to do that, whether that's an incubation role, it's a reporting role, it's just basic automation of their tasks that don't require all the formality of the technology organization, that will help propel your business forward. And I'd like to see us stop referring to that part of it as shadow IT. That's in the fabric of how they do their work.
So in your answers, all of you talked about IT's relationship with the business, right? Which over time, right, there's different models. It can sometimes be a little strange. So what is the right relationship between IT and the business, and how should they view each other?
Well, for me, like I start all of that with my steering committee. So I try to go cross-sectional with the different businesses, at least the bigger businesses. I work for a holding company, so we own 26 businesses right now, and You can't have everyone on the steering committee, but you can have a good cross section of those people. So when you work with them, the steering committee meetings should not be just about an IT presentation on what's going on with respect to technology. It should be a real discussion about strategy and how to bring automation and digitization to the business, across all business processes, both corporate, so our overarching, but also about individual business lines.
Yeah, I think it's trying to move from being viewed as a cost center to actually generating and driving revenue. So as Dave mentioned, how do I sit alongside you and help drive profitability? How do I help drive revenue?
To communicate effectively, you talk about the business and you talk about technology. And at least in my experience, right, there is technology that supports the enterprise, right? And then there's technology that actually is embedded and may actually be the product, right? And it's when those two things get married together, I think it's important that the CIO and their counterparts view each other as teammates. In other words, if I'm going to be building a digital revenue stream, they certainly have expertise in many things related to that, right? The content of what you're building a technology wrapper around. Just use that as an example. They might not be as well versed in how to bring that to market from a technology perspective. And I will share this. One of the biggest frustrations over my career is that there's always been an expectation that a technology person is going to understand some level of financial acumen. They're going to understand something about marketing. They're going to understand something about how we actually make business, so the business of our business. There's an understanding they're going to understand all of those things. There should be an equal understanding going the reverse, which is all of those players need to understand technology, because when that happens, then you can have a very robust and rich dialogue about how you actually move the needle forward.
Well, let me ask you this then. If we look at low code as a platform that enables the business to solve some of their problems, you all talked about IT and the business coming together to learn from each other, right? To learn a little bit about what each other does, or to help educate IT so that you can enter new markets, like building a home online. Does IT have a role in enabling and maybe safeguarding the business, but kind of taking a step back?
Maybe step aside. I think IT has to be a leader in thought around how low code, no code can work within the organization and how it should work in the organization. I think IT has to have a guiding steering role from a training perspective, because as much as we think the business can just pick this up and do it by themselves, my experience with these types of things is that as soon as you get into any kind of what if scenario or if then else scenario, then it becomes much more difficult. And you have to have that programmatic mindset to kind of weave your way through it and get to a good end product.
Yeah, we have to be a facilitator. So we're going to see this across multiple lines of business over time. You're going to see kind of what works, what doesn't work. You should have some level of process expertise, so understanding how processes work. And then you meet with the business and really help facilitate their use of the tool. You facilitate their understanding of a process and how that interacts with the tool. And then you step aside and let them go at it.
Yeah, I think on this topic, I think the governance is important. I also think that what IT can bring to bear in many cases is a more in-depth understanding of the pitfalls that they may encounter.
So I'm curious, Yvonne, you talked about a little bit of change management adoption. So IT has a role to play in the change management aspect of digital transformation?
I think they have a huge role to play in the change management and adoption. And I think, most CIOs need to really increase their focus on those areas. They need to partner not only with the people within the business that have to bring their entire organizations along on these things, but with their human resource organizations as well. I mean, I'm a big believer that large digital change really needs to be run like a marketing campaign. I think you need to have something in your sites. You need to get people energized around it. They need to recognize it's part of this. So if I start talking about we're going to go from point A to point D, right? This is the journey we're going to take together. I need to be able to connect for them why we're making investments or why we're asking them to do things every step of the way along that ties into this is what we're all going for.
It's also a generational thing. The new employees coming into the workplace, they're asking why. I think you're seeing now a generation in my kids are the same way. Well, why do I need to do that? Why are we doing it this way? Why does it cost this much? And we have to be able to answer those questions. So yeah, we have to be part of that change management process, and communicating the whys is part of that.
So to that point, I think the CIOs really need to own, for the most part, the change management discipline within the organization. We're well set up to understand the whys and the process of change. What we can't own, never should own, don't want to own, is the actual change itself to the business process and the business itself, because those need to be owned by the executive sponsors for your projects, for the executive sponsors for that business, by the board, the people who need to explain to the people who are going to do the process why it has to change or why we're changing and for what reasons and how it's going to be better at the end of the day.
So, what is the vision for digital transformation? Right? Why should an organization undertake this?
There's probably as many reasons as there are different businesses in the universe, right? But I think what's probably in common, that they all have in common, is that you're seeing digital capabilities evolve to a point where it's disrupting how they've done business in the past, right? And so, and in every case that I can think of, technology has entered into the equation, right? And you have to understand what that impact is, not only on what your clients or your customers are expecting and wanting, but also how do you deliver what they're expecting and wanting, and frankly, keeping them um, surprised a little bit, right? You're getting ahead of what they anticipating what they're going to want next, because those companies that can anticipate that next thing can be a little bit ahead of it.
Over time, you're going to see kind of what works, what doesn't work. You should have some level of process expertise, so understanding how processes work. And then you meet with the business and really help facilitate their use of the tool. You facilitate their understanding of a process and how that interacts with the tool. And then you step aside and let them go at it.
Yeah, I think on this topic, I think the governance is important. I also think that what IT can bring to bear in many cases is a more in-depth understanding of the pitfalls that they may encounter.
Yeah, and I think you're starting to see the customer experience get married with the employee experience as well. If you start the war for talent, all of a sudden you have to digitize to try to grab people that, you know, you may be in a smaller market, you may be in a smaller type of business. How are you going to attract and retain talent? You're probably going to use a lot of digital tools to help do that.